Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Welcome to episode number 29 of the podcast that gives you fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. My name's Simon Head, and joining me as always is my buddy Shamakar Sandhu. How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, Simon. It was a quiet week in the world of high-level elite mixed martial arts, shall we say. Sean Connery came out of me a little bit there. But business is certainly going to pick up as we head towards UFC 209 this weekend, and we're looking forward to getting into the meat of the bones and checking it all out with you.
It's going to be a big weekend for the UFC this coming weekend. We will look ahead to that on this week's show, but we will kick things off looking back at the Bellator 179 press conference in London as Rory MacDonald jetted in to the UK and faced the British press for the first time since being named as Paul Daley's opponent for that main event at Wembley Arena. As I said there, we'll also take a closer look at the two huge title fights coming up this weekend in Las Vegas at UFC 209. And as always, we'll wrap things up by answering your MMA related questions in our weekly Q&A section. Let's kick straight off with the press conference that both myself and you, Sandhu, turned up for in Kensington, London this past week. Actually the second time Bellator landed in the UK in the space of about a week to really get the ball rolling with Bellator 179. Paul Daley taking on Rory MacDonald. This time round, Rory Mac was in the building, and we had some fun and games in the press conference. It turned out to be pretty lively stuff.
Yeah, and I think it was a good move by Bellator. Obviously, it worked out that they had an event in Belfast this past weekend, so they can do a little pit stop in London. This time they had Rory Mac. They didn't have him a couple of weeks ago when they first made the official announcement of him fighting Paul Daley. So it was good to have Rory there, and that was his first press conference headlining or announcing his own kind of main event for Bellator. And I think it was good to kind of just get some time with him, speak to him. He seems pretty screwed on. He seems pretty same old Rory. Just seems really eager to kind of get back in there and just compete again. He's still very much in his prime. One fighter who was conspicuously absent was Michael Venom Page, and of course the previous Bellator press conference we both attended. It was all about MVP and Paul Daley. All the questions were about them potentially fighting and some of the stuff that had been kind of said back and forth between the two. But I think it was good to kind of move that to the side now and really focus the attention on the fight at hand, and that is Daley versus Rory MacDonald. So it's good to kind of get some time with those guys. They also flew in Bobby Lashley, and they said that he's going to be part of the card. No contracts have officially been signed. No opponent has been announced for him just yet, but it looks like he'll be a part of the card. And also MVP's opponent was announced, Derek Anderson, a former lightweight who's now going to make, from what he says, a permanent move to welterweight. He was sporting a pretty funny bright gold tooth, which she had a funny story with us about before. And apart from that, I think it was a good media turnout, Si, especially for the having them back to back. It's always kind of hard to kind of get the media, most of who aren't really doing this in a full-time capacity, get them together to attend these press conferences in the middle of the week, middle of the day. But they've also announced since then another fight, Liam McGeary versus Linton Vassell. So I thought all in all, it was a positive for Bellator. It got some positive momentum up and running, especially with them announcing that the tickets were going to go on sale this past week, which was brought forward. So I don't know how ticket sales have gone for them, but hopefully it does well. We always want to see all of these promotions do well because this means that the likelihood of them coming back with bigger and better events is that much higher. But all kind of some of your key takeaways from the actual press conference itself, Si.
First key takeaway, Mike Morgan, our friend from Woe TV, stole the show with his line of questioning of Paul Daley and Rory MacDonald. I do have the live stream replay of that press conference on my Twitter. Do check that out. It was comedy gold. It was quite amusing. His line of questioning was pretty cool. Daley, I thought, was pretty relaxed and happy to have Rory there, and the stare down was pretty intense. I thought that was a proper stare down. There was no animosity between the two. You got two fierce competitors there, and I think they're both really, really keen to just get in there and really make a statement at Bellator 179, and that's going to be our main event. It's going to be really exciting. As for Rory, as you said, it was the same Rory we're used to talking to, and very, very sort of calm on the level. You don't get many extremes of emotion with Rory MacDonald. He's very consistent. But the thing that I got out of him, he seemed very relaxed and happy to be a Bellator fighter, having made that switch across from the UFC. He likes the freedom. He likes the pay packet as well. It sounds like he's getting better compensated for his job under the Bellator banner, which is good for him. He wants the world title, and he also wants to go up and fight at middleweight as well. But he's excited for this Paul Daley fight. And the big takeaway that I got from him was, we already know that Rory MacDonald is an exciting fighter, but he says that he's going to leave caution at the door when he gets in there against Paul Daley, and we're going to see an even more offensive Rory MacDonald this time round. So that really does bode well for the fight. I thought Derek Anderson, having never spoken to the guy before, I thought he was good value, pretty engaging. The thing that really sort of struck me with him was, this is his first real chance to sort of take a bit of the spotlight and enjoy a bit of the media attention. He seemed to sort of take it all in his stride. He seemed very happy to sort of field all these weird and wonderful questions from these strange foreign journalists that we all pitched up. And I thought he coped really well. I didn't get a chance to chat at length to Bobby Lashley, but he's a good name to have on the card. Obviously, we have a strong professional wrestling fan base here in the UK, and there is a clear crossover between pro wrestling and MMA. So I think that works quite nicely in this particular market in the UK, having someone who is doing pretty well. He's currently working an angle with former UFC heavyweight champion Josh Barnett in Impact Wrestling, which is kind of interesting. So you've got two guys who, they do a bit of pro wrestling, they do a bit of MMA, and they're working an angle at the moment for Impact Wrestling. But Bobby was very clear in that his wrestling commitments weren't really going to get in the way of him preparing for this fight, and that he's going to get in there. He doesn't know who he's going to face yet. I think the plan was for him to face Ollie Thompson, but his fight with Chet Congo, A, he lost it, and B, it wasn't a particularly competitive fight. So they've gone back to the drawing board with that one. So it'd be interesting to see who they pick for Bobby Lashley. But I have to say, I think the way that they're doing things, Sandhu, they're building steadily. Having the two press conferences in close proximity, I think, has really helped sort of pique the interest. And having a main event like Daley versus MacDonald, especially when you consider some of the criticism that's been levied at the UFC for their main event for the upcoming London card in March, I think Bellator are looking in a pretty good spot right now as they're building up for this May event, Bellator 179. What do you reckon?
Absolutely. Scott Coker himself said that they're looking at this as one of their tentpole events, which is why I'm really interested to find out what other fights we're going to get on this particular card. And there will be time delay for the folks over back in the US, but again, they're going to do the same thing that they did last year here for the UK broadcast, where there will be a time delay on it, but Spike UK will get the first hour 9 to 10, and then from 10 to midnight you're going to get, I would imagine, the top three fights of the card, maybe main, co-main, and then the third fight. And if it goes according to what the current setup is, you're going to get Paul Daley, Rory MacDonald, Michael Page, Derek Anderson, and Liam McGeary versus Linton Vassell, right? So you've got plenty of British fighters that could use that spotlight on Channel 5. If I remember correctly, they got something in the ballpark of around about 500,000 viewers last time round, which is, pretty
good.
Pretty amazing. It's although there's a bit of a time delay, it is on free TV, so you don't need a special subscription to watch it in the UK. Of course, I'm sure your Twitter blows up like mine does from now and then regarding Bellator finally kind of getting a proper TV deal in place where everyone can watch their fights live. That still isn't the case at the moment. I'm sure Scott Coker and everyone behind the scenes, both at Channel 5 and Spike UK, would like that to happen. It's just unfortunate, I suppose. We could keep banging the drum and keep asking and keep questioning it, and then that's all we can do. But hopefully that is something that changes in the near future. But on the flip side, what we've got here is a stellar main event in Paul Daley, Rory MacDonald. And again, calling a spade, if you ask pretty much everyone in the UK MMA community, that's the best main event we've got when you stack up the UFC event with the Bellator event. Now, overall, card top to bottom, I think eventually you're going to see the UFC card has more strength in depth, more characters, more fighters who are much higher on their journey, fighting on the elite level. And again, it depends what you want and what you're after for a night of fights. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of fans that will be attending both. But I'm really looking forward to finding out how the ticket sales do, how the arena is configured on the night, what kind of atmosphere we're going to get. Will there be empty seats? Will it be rammed and packed to the rafters? The event is held at the SSE Arena in Wembley on May 19th. Tickets are on sale now, FYI. And I concur with everything you said, Simon. Having those two press conferences back to back in the space of a few weeks just helped build momentum. It didn't hurt that they had an event in Belfast just around the corner, so our friends over the other side of the pond could get some access to these guys and get some media coverage out of them. But we are still about 2.5 months away. So let's just see kind of how things progress over the course of the next 9 or 10 weeks.
Yeah, and as you said, we've got some good fights on that card already. We know that we're going to get more as they fill that card out. One really exciting potential matchup, which was called for this past weekend, James Gallagher. He wants on this London card, and he wants AJ McKee. That's a rivalry that seems to have been bubbling under, and it's now finally breaking through. Two of the top prospects in Bellator's 145-pound division. Imagine that if we get that fight on that card as well. AJ McKee, for me, is one of the standout prospects for Bellator in any weight class. And you've got James Gallagher, who is absolutely flying up that 145-pound division. He looks in great form. McKee looks in great form. They're both really exciting prospects. Will Scott Coker pitch them against each other on a big tentpole event like this? Or do you think he might keep them apart and build them a little bit further down the line for when they can put a belt on that kind of matchup? What do you reckon?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. I say why not? If that's what Gallagher wants, why not stick it on the London card? It's not too far for him to travel. It might even help get some of his fellow Irishmen to fly over for the card. It's not too expensive to fly from Dublin to London these days, and it would help make for more of a UK and Ireland flavour as opposed to just an all British affair type of thing. So yeah, great, and I'm glad that James Gallagher is using these opportunities. He's winning fights. He's very well spoken. He's making the best of these post-fight interviews, calling his shot, and that's what you want to see. You want to see great performances, you want to see finishes, but then you also want to know what's next. And James Gallagher has laid it out there. He wants AJ McKee next. Let's get it done.
Yeah, that would be a dynamite addition to what's building up to be a pretty exciting looking fight card. Bellator 179. Now the next big event we have on our horizon comes up this Saturday night from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. UFC 209. And Sandhu, we talked about this just before we went on air. It's kind of amusing that in a week where we had the Oscars and that incredible mix-up for the Best Picture, we are now looking at the rematch where there was also a big mix-up at Madison Square Garden. Bruce Buffer initially announcing Tyron Woodley as the winner of that first matchup with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I know everyone sat with me on press row were bellowing at the cage going, it's a draw, it's a draw. Finally, they confirmed the result. And mid-interview, Joe Rogan had to break it to Tyron Woodley that he hadn't actually won that fight at all, that it was a draw, that he got to keep his belt. But it was a wholly sort of disappointing way to finish what was one of the most exciting fights of 2016. There had to be a rematch. We're getting the rematch on Saturday night. It's the main event. Where is your money going? If you were indeed going to put money down on this event, Sandhu, it's the big question because there's so much unresolved from the first fight. It went 5 rounds. How did you score that first fight as well? Because I had it as a draw.
Well, I can't be 100% sure, but I think if memory serves me correctly, I think I had it just for Tyron Woodley, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I'll have to go back and kind of like see how I scored that. And I actually haven't seen the fight back again yet, but it is something that I want to try and do this week. But the one main takeaway from that fight was one of the main kind of concerns I had, and I've always had about Tyron Woodley, and that's his gas tank. And that was a big, big question that was answered for me. And it really kind of helps me shape how I kind of see him as a fighter and how I kind of would, play my prediction game with him moving forward. I am going to pick him to win. I think he proved in that fight he can conserve his energy very efficiently over the course of 25 minutes. And he can still he's still very explosive. He'll still get his 1-2 combinations in there. And I think, having spent 25 minutes with Stephen Thompson, he's now started to figure out how best to, navigate the waters with a very unorthodox style that Wonderboy brings to the table. So, and again, all the pressure's on Wonderboy. You don't typically get too many second chances at a UFC World Championship, and he's got one here. He's a very lucky boy to get one. But I've got my money on Tyron Woodley just. I think it's going to be a very tightly contested fair again, and I'm sure Wonderboy would have taken a lot out of that fight, and he would have made plenty of adjustments himself. But I just feel like Tyron Woodley's got a lot of momentum, and I think all of this kind of him against the world kind of narrative that he's kind of brought to the table over the last couple of months has almost kind of served to self-motivate him to make sure that he does keep on winning. Because he's kind of like gambling with all of his chips every time he goes out, does an interview, every time he goes out and puts on a fight. So I'm picking Tyron Woodley to win just slightly, and I think he'll go the distance again. I'll think he'll get done on points. Hopefully this time there's no error in Bruce Buffer's announcement.
Oh blimey! The last thing we need is another draw. That would just be disastrous. This is going to come across as fence sitting, and it probably is, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. The smart bet here is Tyron Woodley. Without a doubt, the smart bet is Tyron Woodley. I'm backing Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, however, because I'm not smart. But the smart money is Tyron Woodley, because look back at that first fight. Tyron Woodley should have won that fight in the 4th round. He decked Wonderboy. Wonderboy was in all sorts of trouble, and Tyron Woodley made a decision that effectively, it didn't lose him the fight, but it cost him the win, because obviously it ended up as a draw. And he made a decision that cost him the win. And that was when he had Wonderboy down on the mat. He had him in a lot of trouble. He was landing punches and elbows on the ground. And then he went for the guillotine choke. And he locked up the guillotine choke. And all credit to Wonderboy, he managed to gut it out and survive that. But by doing that, it basically stopped the damage that was being poured onto Wonderboy at that point. And it wouldn't have taken a hell of a lot more for the referee to stop that fight. He looked ready to be stopped. And Woodley switched gears, and I think that cost him the win that night. I still think there are some question marks over Tyron Woodley. I mean, he's a great athlete, and from what I can make out about him, he's a decent guy as well. But I think he still hasn't quite earned his stripes in the eyes of a lot of people. The only championship level opponent that he's actually beaten to earn his title shot was Carlos Condit, and that was a controversial win anyway because it was an injury. Since then, he got beat by Rory MacDonald. He knocked out Dong Hyun Kim, who isn't championship level. And he went to a split decision with Kelvin Gastelum, who couldn't make weight. So he's done well to get the title shot. He obviously blew away Robbie Lawler, which suggests that he's definitely worthy of being at that level. But now he's got to assert some dominance, and he didn't do that sufficiently against Wonderboy. And he knows he should have put Wonderboy away at Madison Square Garden. And I think this is the fascinating thing, Sandhu. You've got two guys who both think that they dropped the ball in the first fight. You've got Woodley, who realises he should have finished Wonderboy in the 4th round. And you've got Wonderboy, who I spoke to after the fight and said to me that he was gun shy through most of the fight. His output wasn't anywhere near high enough. He wasn't mixing up his strikes much. And he was disappointed with how he performed. And yet, he still didn't lose the fight. He got dropped, he got hurt, and he fought well below what he felt was his best, yet he still didn't lose. So that's quite a big upside for him as well. So the big question is, who's going to adjust best in this main event? I think it's a fascinating contest. It was a fascinating contest to start with. Now, when you factor in the first fight and the fact that neither guy is 100% happy with what they did first time round, and you've not got the shock factor or the surprise factor. Both of them are now known quantities to each other. I think it's going to be a fascinating contest. I'm leaning towards Wonderboy just, and the reason for that is I think it's going to take something a little bit out of the norm, a little bit out of the ordinary to make the difference in this fight. And if I look at it, I think the guy who's got the greatest propensity to do that is Wonderboy Thompson. But it really is a coin flip of a fight, and I cannot wait to watch it. It's going to be a good one, Sandhu. It's going to be a good one.
It really is. I'm looking forward to seeing all the coverage that comes out of Fight Week with both of these guys, kind of doing the rounds with the media, doing all the interviews. I'm sure there'll be a press conference and whatnot. Yeah, it's just a fascinating fight, and it's the one time where I think a rematch is well deserved. And it's justified. Of course, it does create a bit of a logjam. You got the likes of a Damian Maia waiting in the wings, hoping to get a title shot. GSP's just returned. What are his intentions? We don't quite know just yet. It'll be interesting to see, especially if Woodley wins, if he does go for the jugular, call out GSP to kind of cement his own legacy as a future great welterweight champion. I think, and I suspect, if Stephen Wonderboy wins, he won't particularly go that route, given his ties to the TriStar team, having trained with GSP in the past, and having been brought in as a training partner on many occasions as well. So it's a really, really good main event. Absolutely loving this fight. And it's a 1-2 combination, Simon, because in the co-main event, we've got Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, and that could be its own main event in its own right. And that's for the interim lightweight championship. Your thoughts on Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, Si?
That is going to be... It's going to take one hell of a fight to upstage that main event, but if any fight could do it, that's the fight. Very, very quickly, before I talk about that, you mentioned Damian Maia. I don't know if it's been officially confirmed yet, but today, this morning, it's the news is starting to drip feed out that he's going to face Jorge Masvidal in the new main event in Nashville, Tennessee. That was originally going to be Cub Swanson versus Artem Lubov. I assume that fight will get bumped down to co-main if that Maia versus Masvidal fight gets confirmed. That's one hell of a fight, Maia versus Masvidal. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit nearer the time, but I just wanted to drop that in while we were talking about Damian Maia. Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. Look down the UFC roster, Sandhu. I don't know if there's a better just head-to-head matchup that you could make on paper in any weight class in the UFC right now. I think this is arguably the most fascinating matchup that you could make anywhere, any weight class. You've got Khabib, 24 fights, no losses. He's 8-0 in the UFC. Then you've got Tony Ferguson, who's on a 9-fight win streak in the UFC. And they're both converging at this point where there's an interim belt on the line, and the winner potentially, and we have to underline, put in quote marks the words potentially, could end up fighting Conor McGregor next. Now, there's an awful lot of things that need to happen for that to take place, but the interim champion really does deserve to get a shot at the undisputed belt in their next fight. So this is an absolutely colossal fight in the career of both men, and it's a clash of styles. You've got Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is one of the most predictable fighters in the UFC lightweight division. You step in the cage with Khabib, you know exactly what you're going to get. He's going to walk across the cage, he's going to put his hands on you, he's going to take you down, and he's going to smash you until the referee stops it or until you quit. There's no airs and graces, there's no hidden tricks. You know what you're going to get from him. Contrast that with Tony Ferguson, who's one of the wildest, most unpredictable fighters in the division, and you've got this fantastic clash of styles, and MMA so often is about a clash of styles. And this one really is. You've got two guys who go about their business in very, very different ways, but they're both very effective, and I cannot wait to see this one. I mean, I'm siding towards Khabib just because I just think he looks the harder guy to beat. I think he gives you fewer chances to beat him. I think Tony Ferguson will quite happily put himself in danger to get to a fight-winning position, and I think that might cost him against Khabib, just because Khabib Nurmagomedov is just such a beast at 155 pounds. He's a big, strong lad at 155, and I think if he gets his hands on Ferguson, Ferguson's gonna have an awful lot to deal with. But what a matchup! What a matchup! And this would main event almost any other UFC card. Certainly would have main evented pretty much every other card we've had so far this year, with ease. And it's the co-main event. You know, we are being spoiled with two fantastic championship fights this weekend. Where are you leaning on this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is I know that seems like for a while now, I think we keep having this kind of like underlying theme of meritocracy in the sport and meritocracy in the UFC specifically. there's no better way to describe this than how this fight has been put together. In the absence of Conor McGregor, you literally have 1A and 1B outside of the champion fighting each other, the absolute very best. And in fact, in my opinion, I've said this before, for me, Khabib Nurmagomedov, belt or no belt, is the best lightweight in the world. It's hard to go against someone. It's hard to be undefeated in MMA, period, let alone to continue your streak well into your UFC career, which Khabib has done at this point. And it's so hard to go against an undefeated fighter, Simon. So I'm leaning towards Khabib ever so slightly again. Again, with the main and the co-main event, you could literally flip a coin and it can go either way. That's how evenly contested these two fights are. But I just feel like Khabib, his time is now, like the old saying goes. He had a couple of years there where he was battling injury, and I think he made the right move to go over to AKA, where he could perhaps round out his striking. I mean, his sambo and his wrestling, that pedigree is proven. He doesn't need to do any more there, apart from just keep those skills at a very finely tuned level. But Tony Ferguson, one thing he's definitely got going in his favor is a gas tank. And he can go 25 minutes, and he can go full pelt at 25 minutes as well. And it'll be interesting to see if he can manage to take Khabib into the championship rounds, how Khabib is able to actually handle himself in those deep waters. Because historically, like you said, Simon, he'll grab you, tie you up, pummel you, and the referee will step in before you even know what time it is, right? So I'm going for Khabib here. And I also think that whoever comes out on top as a champion here, or as the interim champion at least, it's going to be a star-making performance. It's a big spotlight. It's a massive stage. Obviously, whoever wins is going to be, I would imagine, calling out Conor McGregor. We've seen them both use those post-fight interview skills to great effect, especially Khabib in New York. Whatever happens here, whoever wins, you've got and not that he needs it, but you've got a genuine big money fight waiting in the wings at 155 pounds for Conor McGregor that is based on meritocracy. There's none of this jumping up and down divisions or trying to get a money fight, a rematch, a trilogy fight with Nate Diaz. If the UFC put Conor McGregor versus the winner of Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, there's just no arguments, no complaints that McGregor isn't fighting the absolute best number one contender that you can possibly face in that particular weight class. So much riding on this as we kind of, we haven't even finished Q1 yet, but already the outcome and the verdict of this particular fight will have massive ramifications on how the UFC match makes and does the booking for H2.
Definitely, and I was just looking down the career records of Khabib and Tony Ferguson. You only got 4 common opponents. 4. Normally you might get 1 or 2. They've both beaten Gleison Tibau. They've both beaten Abel Trujillo. They've both faced Michael Johnson. Tony Ferguson lost to Michael Johnson. That was his last defeat, but that was 5 years ago. Right. Tony Ferguson's a different animal now. And they've both got decision victories over former lightweight champion of the world, Rafael dos Anjos. So you look at their bodies of work, there are certain similarities there. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think if you take a look at Ferguson's most recent fights compared to Khabib's recent fights, it's really hard to choose between the two. It really is. I think Khabib has probably been more dominant, even though he's had a run of decisions in his last. I think, where are we? 3 of his last 5 fights have gone to decision, but they were all pretty dominant. So, and you look at Tony Ferguson coming off that Rafael dos Anjos win. That's the biggest win of his career. I remember watching him against Edson Barboza in Vegas 2 years ago, and to walk through those Barboza leg kicks and then submit the guy was a remarkable performance. That amazing firefight with Lando Venata, where he was in trouble for a little while against Lando in that first round, but he overcame that and dealt with it. It is a absolutely cracking fight. I have a theory that the longer the fight goes, the more it might lean towards Tony Ferguson. Mm-hmm. Assuming he isn't completely battered by that point. I think Khabib is incredibly dangerous early on, and if Ferguson can keep the fight standing and can drag it past the third, I think the fight will start to tilt in his favour. I just have a feeling that Khabib has probably got the edge on paper, but of course they're not fighting on paper, are they? They're fighting on canvas. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing how that one shakes out. It's going to be an absolute cracker of a co-main event. As I say, worthy of a main event pretty much anywhere in the world. Quickly looking at the other three fights on that main card, Rashad Evans is taking on Judo Dan Kelly. The wily veteran from Down Under has got himself a quite decent fight there against Rashad Evans, who I think everyone will be happy to see Rashad back. He's had a lot of problems he's had to overcome. He was going to fight on 205, didn't get cleared. He was going to fight in Toronto, didn't get cleared. Now we understand he's cleared. All is well. He's going to be taking on Dan Kelly. Lando Venata, who we mentioned just a minute ago, giving Tony Ferguson a scare. He's on this main card. He's taking on David Tamer. That is the sleeper fight of the night right there. David Tamer knows nothing better than to stand and trade. Lando Venata loves the scrap himself. Mark that one down. Do not go to the toilet when that fight is on. No boiling the kettle, no going to the loo. That is a fight you cannot afford to miss. And opening the main card, two of the big guys, Alistair Overeem and Mark Hunt. What else can you say? Two of the most dangerous heavyweights on the planet. Mark Hunt has got a point to prove. Alistair Overeem is desperate to bounce back after being knocked out by Stipe Miocic. This is a stacked main card, Sandhu. What do you make of these other three fights? I mean, is Rashad going to come back with a win? Are we going to see Lando moving on? Is Mark Hunt going to really make a statement on his return to the octagon? There's so many storylines to follow here.
You just hit the nail on the head, Simon. There's just so many fascinating storylines outside of the two stellar main events that we've got, where we've got literally the best of the best fighting each other at 170 and 155 pounds. In terms of Rashad Evans, I think this might be a bit of a make or break fight for him. Obviously, there's been so much concern with him not getting clearance from athletic commissions with regards to, his was it a CT scan or a concussion or the overall kind of situation with his overall brain scan. So something not to be kind of taken lightly, obviously, with so much of a spotlight on CTE these days. But he's got the clearance from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which tends to be the gold standard when it comes to athletic commissions in the US anyway. But he seems to kind of say that he's in the best shape of his life. We've kind of heard this kind of stuff before when we've seen other fighters move up and down weight classes. I think the fight with Dan Kelly makes sense. I don't think you want to kind of feed him to the Sharks right away and give him a top 5 or top 7, top 8 middleweight just yet. But I think if he can manage to get a decent to, I suppose, emphatic performance and win and hopefully a finish, then that should, and again, I'm sure he'll use his post-fight interview opportunity appropriately as well. I don't see why you wouldn't want to throw him straight up against a top 10 opponent and see how he can handle himself. At least then by then he's proven he can make the weight. Hopefully he can on Friday morning. And if he comes out on top and wins in his middleweight debut for the UFC, then great, fantastic. Then you're on the right path. Then you've almost kind of reignited your career within the UFC, which over the last couple of years has really stumbled quite a bit, especially in that light heavyweight division. Landon Nevada, massive spotlight on him at the moment. Massive spotlight. But I agree with everything you said. We've had the opportunity to see David Tamer up close and personal, cage side, and also interview him here on the European circuit. Absolutely stand and bang type of fighter. He comes from a big kickboxing background. I'm really going to be interested to see how this fight plays out, because I don't think it's going to go the distance. I really don't. Someone's going to get put to sleep in that fight for sure. And it'll be interesting to see. I think this is a really good litmus test for Lando Venata against somebody who's got a really rock solid chin and can kick and punch with both left and right sides of his anatomy. So I can't wait to see how that plays out. And like you said at the top end, Simon, to start the main card, Alistair Overeem, Mark Hunt. Now, the last time these two fought was approximately 9 years ago in Dream, and Alistair Overeem beat Mark Hunt with a submission, an Americana of all things. I don't feel like that's the same way it's going to go this time. But it's a very interesting fight at heavyweight. Mark Hunt, obviously, he's still got a lawsuit pending against the UFC, which is bizarre. And that was only made public and only kind of official after this bout agreement had been signed and sealed and made official. And for Alistair Overeem, I think he's just now trying to kind of get his UFC career on back on track. Obviously, he had his title shot against Stipe Miocic last September. It didn't go his way, lost by knockout. But he still is chasing that unicorn. He wants to become the UFC champion, so he can kind of, I suppose, fill the last empty space on his trophy cabinet, which has already got Dream, K1, and Strikeforce championship belts and trophies. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Like I said at the start of the show, Simon, business is most definitely picking up with this UFC 209 card, and I can't wait for Saturday night. And actually, for those of our listeners who are based in the London area, now might be a good time to mention that our old friends at the Grosvenor Casino in Russell Square, they will be hosting a special UFC 209 viewing party. And I don't follow boxing as much as I used to, back when I was a teenager, Simon. But I know that the Bellew Hay fight is also taking place on Saturday night. And I believe what Grosvenor are going to be doing is they'll be showing the boxing followed right by the UFC event. So it's a pretty great night of fights there, and I believe that the deal is still going on. It's $8.95 or $8.99 for a beer, burger, and a bet. I will throw the Eventbrite ticket link on our social media, and I'm sure it'll be embedded in the post for the podcast as well. So there's an opportunity for Londoners to get together with fellow fans and have a great night of fights at a casino.
Yeah, Hay versus Bellew is a really interesting matchup. They are going to get it on because they don't get along. As Muhammad Ali once said, there is so much needle in that matchup, I cannot tell you. Tony Bellew, light heavyweight, cruiserweight world champion. David Hay, former cruiserweight and former heavyweight world champion, are going to compete at heavyweight. That's going to be an absolute banger of a fight. I do not expect it to go past about 5 rounds, but it's going to be lively for as long as that one lasts. That's a perfect warm-up to the UFC. And the Mark Hunt Overeem fight. Someone who is already looking to face Mark Hunt next is a Black Beast, Derek Lewis, who we spoke at length about on last week's show. But I have to say, Derek Lewis versus whoever wins that fight would make a lot of sense. I think, obviously, he was looking towards Mark Hunt. But if Alistair Overeem were to win this fight, why not make Alistair Overeem, Derek Lewis, in Rotterdam later this year?
I like it.
That would be an absolutely brilliant main event. James Elliott, if you're listening. And that would be perfect. If the UFC are going to come back to the Netherlands, I know the Rotterdam event was a huge success. I know there was talk of Amsterdam while we were over there. But I guess it depends on how big a show they can put on in terms of the fight card, whether they would actually take it to the Amsterdam arena. I'd be more than happy to go back to Rotterdam, though. That was a brilliant weekend, great event. And having the Reem headlining, and don't forget he won when headlining last year against, who was he fighting? Andrei Arlovski, knocked out Andrei Arlovski. And why not? The Reem versus Derek Lewis, or Mark Hunt versus Derek Lewis. Either one of those fights makes a hell of a lot of sense. What a great fight to kick off that main card. Very quickly, just running down the prelim card so you know who's on. Marcin Tybura taking on Luis Enrique at heavyweight. A featherweight bout, which is, I think, you mentioned litmus test earlier for Lando Venata. This is the litmus test for Mirsad Bektic taking on Darren Elkins, who is probably the hardest man in the featherweight division to look good against. He does a brilliant job of just getting hold of people and just grinding them into the dust and making pretenders of everybody. So if Mirsad Bektic can do a number on Darren Elkins, watch out for him. He's one of the most talented guys in that featherweight division who hasn't had a push yet. This could be the coming out party for him. Yuri Alcantara, who had that incredible performance against Brad Pickett in Manchester, taking on Luke Sanders. And Britain's own Mark Godbeer taking on Daniel Spitz, who I just looked at Daniel Spitz's record. Spitz is coming in as a late replacement for Todd Duffy, who was ruled off the fight card last week. Daniel Spitz is 5-0, and the last fight he won was against a guy called Colton Vaughan. But prior to that, it was an April 2016 win. Long-time UFC fans will know the name. Wesley Cabbage Carrera. He beat him by unanimous decision just last April. I was stunned to hear that Cabbage Carrera was still fighting. But there you go. So he's going to be taking on Daniel Spitz is going to be taking on our very own Mark, the Hand of God Beer. And there's also British interest on the preliminary card. The featured Fight Pass prelim features a battle of undefeated light heavyweight prospects. Australia's Tyson Pedro, who is heavy-handed and looks like a real phenom, against Paul the Bear Jew Craig, who himself had a really impressive octagon debut as well. That is going to be a cracking matchup. The other two fights, just to round off that Fight Pass prelim card, Amanda Bobby Cooper, women's strawweight finalist from the Ultimate Fighter, taking on Cynthia Calvillo, and Albert Morales taking on Andre Crikey, how on earth do you say that name? Salkumthath. That doesn't even sound like I've pronounced that right. I apologise. We'll call him Andre. Apologies to him. He's the first one, the first man up. He'll be the first man to walk into the octagon on Saturday night to take on the much easier to pronounce Albert Morales. That is UFC 209. That will be live. I believe the Fight Pass prelims, assuming the fight card stays intact, Fight Pass prelims will kick off at 11:30, exclusive to UFC Fight Pass. Then the televised prelims will be shared between UFC Fight Pass and BT Sport 2, I believe, from 1 a.m. The main card will be exclusively live on BT Sport 2 from 3 a.m. That is going to make for one hell of a fight night. And if you mix that up with the boxing as well, you've got yourself a packed night of mixed martial arts action. There is also on Fight Pass earlier in the night, Cage Warriors 81 live from Dublin. So if you really want to go mad for it, you could basically have something in the region of 10 hours of live fights just in one hit. I suggest you sort of set yourself a couple of screen breaks, walk around for a bit, so you don't start putting roots down on your sofa. But there is an awful lot of mixed martial arts and boxing action to get your teeth into this weekend. It's going to be a packed weekend. Sandhu, it's a slightly truncated show this week, but I think this probably works well for the pair of us. Should we launch into the Q&As?
Absolutely. I think the show so far has been short, sweet, to the point, no fanning about.
Yes.
That's the way we like it.
Very much
right.
So.
Right, so we got. Thanks again, first of all, everyone tweeting in. I know it was a bit of an early call to action. The fact that me and Simon are actually recording the show slightly earlier than our usual Monday evening time slot. So I appreciate everyone that hit us up late Sunday night with the questions. Actually, the first question I want to kind of ask is on behalf of Wayne Korotinich, and I probably butchered his surname, so sorry about that, Wayne. He actually tweeted us middle of last week, and it's in regards to a bit of unfortunate news regarding former UFC fighter Terry Etim. He's asking us if we can give him any more news regarding Terry Etim, and if any of the listeners aren't aware of it just yet, the Liverpool Echo published a story early last week regarding Terry Etim, and unfortunately, I don't exactly know the details of what he's personally going through right now. But he was involved in an incident where he essentially threw himself, or this is what the eyewitness reports are, that he threw himself into road traffic. I think it was around 3 or 4 vehicles, and he was at the time in very serious condition at a local hospital there. I'm sure when people hear the name Terry Etim, the first thing that pops to mind is that very flashy spinning heel kick that knocked him out stiff at the hands of Edson Barboza. Simon, I don't know if you were following the story much closely at all, or if it was still just the initial news report by the Liverpool Echo that you're kind of, I suppose, absorbing or have absorbed since. But there was a lot of outpour of heartfelt, I suppose, messages, wishing Terry, all the best. Your thoughts on the current situation and what he's kind of gone through this last week?
Yeah, it's always slightly tricky when you don't have the full picture and the full story of what's gone on. We obviously know about the incident itself, which has been widely reported now. I think the main thing that we can say is that we wish Terry Etim the speediest and fullest of recoveries, and we hope that whatever issues he might be going through, he can deal with those, and through the help of his friends and his family, and perhaps his teammates, he can get himself through. He hasn't competed professionally since November 2013, it was a bizarre story to hear about, and I know, the natural thing for people to do is to speculate, and I think in a situation
Yeah.
like this, it's probably best not to. The most important thing is that Terry's getting the care that he needs right now, and that hopefully from this point on he gets all the help he needs, whether it be from a sort of almost like a pastoral thing, and just to help him move on from what clearly seems to be a difficult time in his life. So, I think I'm sure that I'm echoing the views of all the British fight fans and anybody sort of worldwide who knows anything about Terry and his fighting career. A very entertaining fighter, and we just wish him and his family all the best, and we hope that he can get through a really tricky spot. And fingers crossed, we hear that there are better things around the corner for him.
Yeah, hopefully when it comes round to recording next week's show, we've got some positive news to share with regards to an update regarding Terry Etim.
Absolutely.
Moving on, Stuart Tuckwell tweets in and says, should BAMMA introduce 5-round title fights? Would have loved to have seen an extra 2 rounds in the Park v Redmond fight. So first of all, Si, did you watch the BAMMA card on Saturday night?
I did. I watched bits and pieces of it. I was kind of dipping in and out because I was having to do some other bits and pieces. I had a slightly tricky night with my 5-year-old daughter, so I was kind of running around doing various things. But it was in the main, it was a good night of fights, and I completely agree with what Stuart was saying there. That fight between Paul Redzer Redmond and Norman Park, we needed another couple of rounds in that fight. I thought it was a really good back and forth contest. I thought it was very, very well matched, and I think if you'd have asked both guys at the end of those 3 rounds, do you want to go for another 2? They'd both have happily taken them. It was something I was talking online to a couple of people. They did used to have 5-round title fights when it was a BAMMA World Championship fight. The thing that reminded me of this was the infamous and some say legendary middleweight championship fight between Tom Kong Watson and Alex Reed, which remains one of the best domestic fights I think I've seen. It was absolutely brilliant, that fight. And that one went the distance. That went all 5 rounds. And Mark Goddard actually jumped on Twitter and confirmed that they did used to have 5-round fights, and I think he was one of the driving forces behind them having 5-round world title fights. Since then, they've gone back to 3. Now that might be to make it easier to package for television. When you've got a bigger, a much longer matchup, might be harder to fit into television schedules, especially if you've only got an hour or an hour and a half of air time to fill. If you've got a 5-round fight in there, that doesn't leave you a lot of wriggle room for anything else. I think for me, there's 2 different levels of championship in BAMMA. You've got the World Championship and you've got the Lonsdale Championship, which used to be the Lonsdale British Championship, but they've dropped British from that. So it's just like a second, almost like, imagine it being the Intercontinental title to the main world title.
Right.
If you want to look at it that way. So if you win the Lonsdale Championship, you're like the top prospect or like, the rising contender, and you've got the belt to prove it. And then the idea is that catapults you towards the world title. I think the Lonsdale belt, doing that over 3 rounds is fine. It would be great to see the main world championship contested over 5 rounds, but I'm sure there are good reasons why that isn't the case at the moment. I'm guessing it's TV related.
Jack tweets in and says, if Bellator sort their live TV issues out, do you think they can compete with the UFC in the UK? So I think Bellator on any given Saturday night, Friday night, whatever night the event takes place, on an event by event case, and on an event by event basis, they can compete with the UFC. Case in point, their upcoming main event, Rory MacDonald versus Paul Daley, hands down the best fight when you're looking at the 2 cards, fight for fight, right? Now, we've mentioned this before, and I've talked about this before as well. I don't think there's a promotion in the world that can compete with the UFC when it comes to its brand awareness. I think there's a lot of people that are probably buying tickets to watch the UFC next month who aren't maybe the most hardcore passionate MMA fans, but the UFC is in town. It's something different to do on a Saturday night in London, and they've nabbed themselves some tickets. And in fact, I know quite a few people who aren't the biggest MMA fans, who don't watch the UFC all the time, but then when they found out the UFC was coming to the O2, they thought, yeah, we'll get some tickets, we'll go check it out. because they're aware of the brand. Those three letters mean so much in combat sports. It holds value that we cannot even comprehend, and we're going to continue to see, and especially in the next kind of like 12 to 18 months, what those three letters really mean, especially when it comes to the TV landscape. So when it comes to any type of broadcast deal, you could be on Channel 5 every Saturday night if you really, wanted to push the boat out on Bellator's kind of, I suppose, exposure in the UK. But you're still not going to be able to compete with the UFC in any form, except when it's an event by event cases, fight for fight, absolutely 100%. And if you're taking the letters UFC and putting them to one side, and you're taking the word Bellator and putting that to one side, and you're purely judging the two promotions based on the criteria of their roster and the best possible fights they can put together, 100%. Bellator can absolutely compete with the UFC in the UK. Do you agree, disagree? Your take on that, Simon?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that the main difference between the UFC and Bellator right now is the UFC is the established brand leader, and also they have a larger roster. And I think the relative sizes of those two rosters are going to gradually get closer. I think Bellator are looking to grow theirs. The UFC are looking to trim theirs. So I think it's going to be a very interesting 18 months to see just how things shake out as Bellator develops into a much more credible rival to the UFC. I do think they do things differently from a promotional standpoint. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's nice to have two similar but not necessarily identical products out there. And I think that one of the interesting things that came out of that press conference with Scott Coker earlier this week, last week, was he was talking about the potential for having a UK series here and creating shoulder programming that will run on Channel 5 and or Spike, and really looking to sort of get some roots down here in the UK. I think they see the value of this market. I think they're of the view that it hasn't been fully exploited by the UFC yet, and I think they see an opportunity there. So that'll be really interesting to see just what they do. I think, as you say, the brand is everything right now, and people talk about UFC as if UFC is the sport. And until that tag gets shaken off, I think the UFC will always have the edge because they are the dominant brand. They're the NFL of the sport. Bellator are putting on increasingly higher quality shows, and shows like the one that they're bringing to London are going to do nothing but good for mixed martial arts on this side of the pond, and nothing but good for their own brand awareness. But I think long term, it's going to be tricky for them to just go sort of toe to toe with the UFC. I think it's a case of choosing their battles and winning those. And in this particular one, they certainly appear to have the more stacked top end of the fight card. But as you said earlier, strength and depth, you've got to give that to the UFC.
Our good friend in the local UK MMA media, Liam Happ, had a pretty interesting tweet. And I saw a cheeky light from you, Simon, so I hope you're pretty well prepared for this particular question. Now, first of all, give Liam a follow if you guys haven't already. It's at Liam Happ, Happe. He's a combat sports journalist for Yahoo, fantastic outlet. And he essentially asks, if three MMA stars were to get an endorsement deal like this, and he tags a picture of a very old WWF Superstars chain of crisp packets that were released, where you had spicy beef with The Undertaker on it, chunky cheese with the Macho Man Randy Savage, and pickled onion with Bret the Hitman Hart on the cover of that particular crisp packet. And he's asking, if any three MMA stars were to get an endorsement deal like this, who would it be and which flavor? Simon, this has got your name written all over it, so fire away.
What does that even mean? Why? Of course I know the answer to this. Right. Okay, cheesy. You need the cheesiest man in the UFC. Sage Northcutt is the cheesiest man in the UFC. I love the man, but he's cheddar. So he is on the cheesy packet. Let's look at the beefy packet. We need the most brazen beefcake, the person who's showing themselves off on Instagram more than anybody else in the UFC. That man is Sage Northcutt. Put him on the beefy packet. And then pickled onion's a bit of a stretch. So I've kind of tweaked it and made it a bit of a Christmas edition. And we've gone for sage and onion. That's right. Sage Northcutt. Just Sage Northcutt needs to bring out his own range of UFC branded snacks. It's a winner. Take it to the bank. I'll take my 5%. Thank you very much.
I couldn't have done any better myself, Simon. That's why you are Simon Head, and this is what you do. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Love that. Right, so to end the segment and to end the show, the final question comes in from Daryl Chumbley, and he says, anyone not in the new Ultimate Fighter show that you would have liked to have seen? That's a tough question, because I guess when you want to try and put together a comeback season, you've got to figure out what weight classes you're going to do, how many available fighters you've got, and if you're going to invite fighters to come back, which of those fighters are still within contract, are out of contract, are perhaps fighting for another organization. It becomes really, really tricky. That's a pretty difficult question for me to answer, Simon. I mean, are there any fighters that come to mind off the top of your dome right away?
Yeah, I mean, we're not dealing in reality here, are we? So I can't get this wrong. One person, had things been different? This is we're talking welterweights, aren't we? We're talking welterweight.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't it have been amazing to see Paul Daley back in there? This is if this is the house of second chances,
right?
Then no one in the world of welterweight mixed martial arts is perhaps more deserving of a second chance than Paul Daley. Now, he's fine and dandy over in Bellator. He's going to main event in London. But could you imagine? And if he was in the house, you'd have to put Koscheck in the house, right? So you'd have, and Koscheck's got some previous when it comes to the Ultimate Fighter. You know, the original bad boy of the Ultimate Fighter house, Tough One, and spritzing on and all of that stuff. So we had all of that, and if Chris Lieben was still about and in any kind of condition to compete, you'd sling him in there as well. You just drag out all the old Tough One guys. The one name who is perhaps more realistic than all of those, who I actually thought was going to go in the Ultimate Fighter house and didn't, was a certain Mr. Philip Brooks, Esquire, aka CM Punk. I thought that this season was going to be built around him, if I'm honest. I thought he would have been, as soon as I mentioned that there was going to be one contracted UFC fighter going in there, I thought it's got to be Punk, because it's all about TV ratings. And all you need to do is you make sure that you don't pick him as the first fight. You say, you know, maybe he goes into the house with a slight injury, in quotation marks, that means that he can't be picked to fight until a bit further in the season. But yet he's on every show. And you do that and you're building up to his fight. And, you know, a Phil Brooks versus an aging Joe Daddy Stevenson might have been something interesting to watch. Could a guy who is trying to launch himself into the UFC do anything against someone whose prime has sort of been and gone, and he's trying to cling on to past glories a little bit? I thought he would have been the perfect candidate to stick in there, and maybe that was the original plan, who knows? But he's the one guy I would have liked to have seen in there, CM Punk.
You answering that question has given me a few minutes to actually think about this a little bit more. And when you think about welterweights, and especially British welterweights who haven't competed in quite some time and are actually contracted still with the UFC, one John Hathaway, who really unfortunately has been battling Crohn's disease since 2010, and it hampered a lot of his career, especially back in 2011, 2012. He last fought back in March of 2014 when he lost to Dong Yong Kim with a vicious spinning back elbow, which is one of the knockouts of the year, and that fight was in Macau. And I remember actually catching up with him. I think it was early last year. I was actually at London Tube Fighters to interview Michael Venom Page, and I just ended up running into John Hathaway, spoke to him for a few minutes. At the time, he didn't think he was anywhere near kind of getting over it. And having spoken to some of the other chaps and ladies and boys and girls in that particular gym, he's not around too often these days, Simon. So maybe he's kind of unofficially retired, and maybe he won't be making a comeback. Who knows? But it's unfortunate, because even right now, as we record this show on the 27th of February 2017, he's still only 29 years old, which is incredible considering his overall record. is still just 17-2. So yeah, if you're going to put somebody who wants to kind of make a comeback, that's my kind of shout out, John Hathaway.
And one of the nicest guys you would ever meet in the sport as well, by the way. Really, really lovely guy. If he does have any designs of getting back in the octagon again, then that's another guy we need to be sending our best wishes to, as I say. Really, really nice guy. Great ambassador for the sport. And it would be great from a British point of view, because we are the Brit Pack, after all.
Yep.
It would be great to see him back in that octagon once again. That pretty much wraps us up, Sandhu.
That's a wrap.
Show number 29. Short and sweet. You can subscribe via iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Acast. You can listen to us directly from our website at thebritpackmma.com. You can follow us on Twitter at thebritpackmma. You can follow Mr. Sandhu at SandhuMMA. And if you're feeling particularly desperate, you can follow me as well at Simon Head. That is the Brit Pack number 29. Episode number 30 will see us look back at the biggest show of 2017 so far. 2 World Championship fights from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Will Wonder Boy get the job done, or will Tyron still be the chosen one? Enjoy the fights. We'll speak to you next week.